During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union treated space as the ultimate high ground. They poured massive national budgets and risked human lives to prove whose system was superior. We tend to remember the space race as an inevitable American victory. That memory obscures the actual day-to-day timeline of the competition. For the entire first half of this rivalry, the United States was losing. They were stuck playing an expensive game of catch-up against a dominant Soviet space program. This timeline maps the specific milestones of both nations side by side, from 1955 to 1975, to track who was leading. It reveals two radically different approaches: the Soviet focus on rapid public relations victories versus the American investment in one massive, long-term objective. This side-by-side comparison tracks the exact moments the lead changed hands, revealing how two different philosophies handled the pressure of the ultimate high-stakes race. The starting line for this competition was the end of World War II. As Germany collapsed, both the Americans and the Soviets scrambled to capture their V-2 missile technology and the engineers who built it. The United States recruited Wernher von Braun, a key German engineer, to lead their rocket program. The Soviets, meanwhile, installed Ukraine-born engineer Sergei Korolev to helm their covert R&D initiative. For a decade, this remained quiet military research. That ended in 1955, when both countries formally announced they planned to launch satellites into orbit. Those announcements started the clock. A classified grab for military hardware shifted into a highly public geopolitical spectacle. Starting this race required an uncomfortable trade-off. Both strict ideological rivals compromised their political purity by relying heavily on former enemy scientists. The first definitive victory went to the USSR. On October 4, 1957, they successfully launched Sputnik 1. This small, spherical object with 4 antennas stunned the American public and provided undeniable physical evidence of Soviet orbital capability. The United States failed to match it immediately. It took them 4 full months to finally launch their first satellite, Explorer 1. Then came the next major escalation. In April 1961, the Soviets put the first human being into space. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin completed a successful return to Earth, elevating him to a worldwide celebrity and a symbol of Soviet dominance. The U.S. responded by launching Alan Shepard in the Freedom 7 3 weeks later. By then, the milestone felt like an afterthought to the global public. Even as the U.S. hit new milestones, like John Glenn finally orbiting the Earth in 1962, the USSR maintained their sprint. In 1963, they launched Valentina Tereshkova, making her the first woman to travel in space. The strategic reality of this phase was clear. The USSR's focus on iterative, rapid deployments consistently secured massive PR victories, forcing the U.S. into a purely reactive and defensive posture. Embarrassed by the constant Soviet lead, President John F. Kennedy opted to completely change the metric of success. In May 1961, he made a bold claim to Congress, committing to land an American on the moon before the end of the decade. The Apollo program was born. NASA received massive budget increases to hit this daunting target. They created the Gemini program strictly as a technological stepping stone. Gemini was designed to test the essential deep space capabilities needed for a lunar trip, culminating in the first American spacewalk by Ed White. Yet the Soviet advantage persisted. During this American R&D phase, Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov achieved the actual first spacewalk a few months before White. Despite losing the spacewalk milestone, the Gemini program successfully perfected unglamorous but necessary maneuvers, like docking 2 spacecraft together in orbit. Pursuing the Apollo moonshot required the U.S. to deliberately sacrifice short-term PR victories. They traded immediate momentum for the time needed to build a long-term, overwhelming technological infrastructure. A decade of American investment finally culminated on July 16, 1969, with the launch of the Apollo 11 spacecraft. The crew included Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, and Commander Neil Armstrong. During descent, a critical malfunction forced Armstrong to land the lunar module manually. On July 20th, the Eagle had landed. Armstrong stepped outside, becoming the first man to walk on the moon. While the U.S. claimed this final victory, the Soviet program suddenly collapsed. Between 1969 and 1972, their attempts at lunar landings repeatedly failed. By achieving this undeniable final goal, the U.S. rendered a decade of Soviet firsts historically secondary. They definitively won the marathon. This chart plots both strategies to evaluate their effectiveness. The Soviet focus on rapid deployments secured early dominance, but the methodical U.S. pipeline shows how to overtake an innovator by scaling toward an unmatched final objective. With the definitive goal achieved and the Soviets defeated, public interest and U.S. government funding for lunar missions plummeted almost immediately. Without a finish line to fight over, Cold War tensions in space naturally began to thaw throughout the 1970s. The ultimate symbol of this thaw was the 1975 Apollo-Soyuz joint mission, where the former rivals docked their spacecraft together in orbit. High above the Earth, the commanders of both crafts opened their hatches and shook hands. The space race began as a fight for supremacy, but it ended in a shared cabin. After 20 years of competing for every milestone, the handshake in orbit became the new symbol for a relationship that was finally moving past the race.